Charting Toward Intimacy covers mature topics. Listener discretion is advised. Charting Toward Intimacy covers mature topics. Listener discretion is advised. Does it ever feel like you and your husband are just not seeing eye to eye when it comes to intimacy? It probably feels like that almost all of the time. The reason it feels like that? Sexual passivity from both of you. Today, we are going to get into what sexual passivity is, why it is ruining your sex life, and how to combat it. Welcome to Charting Toward Intimacy, the sex and intimacy podcast for Catholic women. My name is Ellen Holloway, and I am a Catholic speaker and coach who specializes in sex and marital intimacy, and I am on a mission to help you actually enjoy and desire good, holy sex with your spouse. So, how does sexual passivity affect marriages, and what is it that we can do about it? That's what we're going to be talking about today in this episode. And once we understand that passivity is one of the most common issues that couples have when it comes to sex and intimacy, and once we understand how to combat it, we are on our way to a healthy and holy marriage and a really good sex life. Mike Gomer Gormley is joining me today so that we can really dig into this topic and see both the female and male side of sexual passivity. All right. Welcome to the podcast, Gomer. I'm stoked to have you on here. But then I was realizing, as I was telling people, guys, I'm going to have Gomer on the podcast, that you're kind of like a man's man. And this is a woman's podcast. And like, not that many people know who you are.
Oh, it's true. I always tell people locally I'm world famous. There's like 8 people that know me, and they're very excited about it.
So, Gomer, could you just give us the quick snapshot of who you are and what you do?
Let me see if I can do this quickly. I am married. I have 4 kiddos. Met my wife at Franciscan University of Steubenville. She was a grad student. I was an undergrad, naive about the ways of the world, and this older woman swept me off my feet. I've been doing 17 years in parish ministry since May 8th of 2023. I stepped out of parish ministry, and I work now for That Man Is You, which is a men's ministry in English and Spanish in all over the U.S. and in like 3 or 4 different countries around the world. I've also been doing podcasts on the side. So I've always worked for the church. My heart is always in ministry, in evangelization, especially in equipping Catholics to evangelize our current culture. Our current being half of evangelization is just getting parishes to realize we're not in Christendom anymore, and most of them still haven't realized that. So they rely too much on the culture and all this other stuff to educate and disciple their kids, and it's just a dangerous, dumb thing to do. So my goal is to work with parishes. So I have a podcast called Every Knee Shall Bow with Ascension Press, where me and my buddy Dave Van Vickle try to equip Catholics, whether you work for a parish or an individual. Some episodes kind of relate to one group or the other, on how to evangelize and how to disciple and do things like that, and how to evangelize and speak to this culture. And then another podcast that I do is called Catching Foxes. I've been doing that for almost 9 years now with my buddy Luke. We're at Franciscan together. And that, the way we kind of describe Catching Foxes, it's the collision of faith and culture. It's where we discuss things. We don't try to get super teachy, because there's already 10 trillion Catholic shows that do that. So we have these open-ended discussions. And the way we say it is, it's the conversation that people who are speaking at a conference, it's what they're having after a day's worth of conferences when they're in the bar having a couple beers together and chit-chatting. So, yeah. So those podcasts, it's a lot of fun. And I just after I record with you, I'm doing another podcast on liturgy with Professor Chris Karstens. He's awesome. And then I'm going to start a philosophy podcast, too. So I'm super excited.
My goodness, lots of podcasts.
Yep. All podcasts all the time, baby.
Well, you've got
none of them monetized.
Right? You've got a good voice for
Well,
podcasts.
It's only because I'm sick. My voice is like a couple. Usually I'm very shrill. So I got this like allergy thing going. So, but thank you. I am a man's man.
You got the sultry, low
hey,
voice.
Girls, let's talk about love. Sorry if that was offensive.
All right. So now, why did I bring a man's man onto Charting Toward Intimacy? A couple of reasons. One, I think this is going to be an awesome episode to share with your husband. A lot of people often come to me and they're like, what's the man's perspective on this? Can you share something? And so what we're going to talk about today kind of springs from a talk that you gave, Gomer, I don't know how long ago, but I listened to it, about passivity in marriage. But we're going to specifically talk about kind of what sexual passivity can look like on the woman's side, and then also some things on the man's side, and why sexual passivity is just absolutely not a good thing.
Yes, not a good thing to be sexually passive. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, that talk was actually really funny, that talk. It came from the fruit of about 5 years doing adult faith formation at my parish. So I was the first adult faith formation coordinator full-time at my parish. But it was fascinating because the priest, 7,000 families, 22,000 individuals that were registered at the parish. The priests don't have time to do, marriage counseling for every single couple and all this stuff. So I became the go-to guy for, hey man, I got this thing. Me and my wife, we're in a rough spot. We're doing this, we're doing that. And it was after a woman had come, beautiful woman, had 2 kids. Her husband, handsome dude, 6'2", tall, dark, and handsome, military background, all this stuff. And she told me that they've had sex like 5 times in the past 10 years. And I was like, what? And so she just starts telling me that her husband's addicted to pornography. And if you were to meet him, you would be like, this guy's incredible. He's great. He's charming. He's funny. He has so many things going for him. But then there was this double life, the laptop in the middle of the night kind of thing. And she tried for years to get him to stop, and he tried half-heartedly, and then their marriage crumbled. But then that was the beginning of a cascade of women who'd be like, why isn't my husband doing anything? Why, doesn't he love me? Doesn't he love the kids? But then it was like, why doesn't he touch me? Why doesn't he take me out? And in our own marriages, you have this ebb and flow of intimacy because of work and because of life and because of kids. Sometimes you're very close to each other. Sometimes you kind of get in this distance thing. And that's normal. But people don't know really how to navigate it. They don't know how to talk about it. And so they blame themselves. They internalize shame. They lash out at the other. They resent. And that's just the beginning of the death spiral. So yeah, that's where that male passivity talk came from.
Well, it's an awesome talk. I'll link it in the show notes if you want to, secretly put it in your husband's way and be like, oh my gosh, look at this.
Yeah.
No.
Oh, look at this random talk on male passivity. Don't know what I was Googling to find that.
Don't know how I came across this.
We always joke whenever I do men's conferences. I'm like, I'm so glad your wives made you be here today. And they're all like, It's like, but hey, she's not here with you today, so your ribs won't be as bruised as it is during the homilies when she's elbowing you during mass. So yeah.
Oh my gosh. That's awesome. Well, now sexual passivity, I think when I was just sitting down and thinking about this and thinking about the conversations that I have with women and couples, I see sexual passivity coming from both sides in very different ways. And so from the woman's side, this is the one I see the most, is like, my husband has the higher sex drive, I have the lower sex drive, and you've categorized yourself in that space. Yeah. And you've just basically shut off to, well, since I have the lower drive, this just it's not my thing. It's in his court. And he'll just take care of it when he needs to. Yeah, you're laughing. Thank you.
Would that it were that easy. Yeah, that's funny. Okay.
And I think where that becomes the most detrimental is you end up just like conditioning yourself that as a woman, sex isn't really for me.
Yeah.
It's for my husband. It's his thing. I just do it because I need to, or I do it because it's my duty. Oh my gosh. And then you condition yourself to not actually enjoy sex. So now you're not getting sexual pleasure. You're never initiating. You're never like actually enjoying sex. And now sex has become a purely physical act. There's no spiritual nature to it at all. And now I get why you don't like sex.
Yeah. It's funny. There's the reason why prostitution exists is because in so many ways, men feel like they aren't getting the sex that they want or the sex that they deserve or the sex that they need, whatever label you want, excuse you want to give it to. But one of the funny things that prostitutes say is that there'll be times where they'll go to hook up with a dude and he'll pay him. They'll go to the hotel and he'll just say, "Can we just talk? Can we just cuddle?"
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and there's women making hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in the U.S. and in Japan of women who just are full-time cuddlers, and they just come over and cuddle men, grown men. And it's the weirdest thing, but you realize in a culture without any sort of normalcy around physical intimacy and understanding that I need it, that I literally need physical intimacy, that you'll find it. The marketplace will take care of it, basically. Like, okay, my wife isn't giving this to me, so I'm going to go pay. Now, here's the deal. When I just feel like we always come at this at the wrong, like you were saying, like at the wrong framework towards how to think about sex. If we think about sex as merely an exchange of bodily pleasures, then it's the Discovery Channel and we're just mammals, right? Like this is not what the God ordained purpose of sex. The power within sex, yes, it is pleasurable, and that pleasure can become so ecstatic that you actually forget about the other person. You don't even care about it. You're just riding the wave of pleasure and whatever, right? You get lost in it.
Sure.
But the reality is also the best intimacy, the best sex is where you're both giving yourself to one another, right? It is a mutual, reciprocal self-gift, right? And as philosophical and theological as that might sound, it really is just the bare bones facts of it. Because intimacy starts before sex does, right?
Absolutely.
And here's the deal with women saying that's his thing. And I've heard that too. Oh, what was the line? I love this line. Reverend Timothy Keller has a great book on marriage when they talked about sex in one of the chapters. And the girl is complaining, newlywed woman complaining to her mom, like, all he ever wants is sex. And she goes, oh, honey, it's something that takes so little time and brings him so much joy. So why not get excited about it and have it more often? She's like, Mom. But then she realized, like, well, why does it bring him so much joy? And why does it bring me so much joy? Like, there was a time when it brought me joy. Okay, so you can understand, I think, for a lot of us, that sexual drives, libido, whatever, might be different. And that's when you have a gap between expectation and reality for either of you, you have to have a conversation, right? You have to have a conversation. But sex is inherently embarrassing, right? I always tell the story of Adam and Eve, and I said, imagine the first time Adam sees Eve completely naked, right, in the garden, and she sees Adam, and then she just busts up laughing when she sees him in his nakedness, right? Right, you're like absolutely vulnerable. There's a reason why we call it like the naked truth, right? Like this absolute vulnerability that you have with your bride, with your spouse. And I tell the people, I was like, now imagine on your wedding night, you came out of the bathroom, they're laying in the bed getting ready, and they just see you and they just start laughing their heads off. I was like, you might get divorced at that night. Like that's so embarrassing and shameful. But how many ways do we do that in a passive-aggressive manner, right? Like we undercut the manhood or the femininity of our spouse with these like subtle cues that I'm just not that interested in you physically, right? I don't find you attractive anymore is one of those, because it used to be you could hardly keep your hands off each other, right? You end up having to go to confession when you were engaged, right? Like these things that happen in our relationships. And then all of a sudden, it flips around and it becomes a duty. And then it goes from, this is the best. I was just at Mass. I went to a Latin Mass. I haven't been to Latin Mass in 20 years. And I was in Dallas and I heard about this church, Mater Dei, and I drove down. I went to a high Mass. And the priest gave a very beautiful homily. But one of the things that he said was, he quoted Christ, right? Loving only those who love you back, and don't the Gentiles do the same? No, you must love those who hate you. And he said, let me tell you what that means. He said, do you know what duty is? To love someone out of a sense of duty? He said, a lot of people, I'm not going to do that. That's it's like limiting my freedom. I want it to be spontaneous. He said, but duty is the beginning of awakening to the fact that I am incapable of loving people that I think are unlovable. But God loves that person. And because I love God, I need to learn how to love that person with my own love and with God's love, right? But duty is that first step of, I'm going to do this justice to you because God loves you, and I don't feel it, but I need to learn how to love you, right?
I'm just loving so many things that you said. I want to go back to one of the things that you said about like needing physical touch, which was actually kind of a while ago.
So many words ago.
I didn't mean that as an undercut.
Yeah, man. Now you're just like my wife. I get it. No.
Gomer talks a lot. But the needing physical touch, because I think there can often be like a misunderstanding there of like, you know, the need that Gomer is talking about is that like humans have to have physical touch in order to be human, basically. Like there are studies of infants that were not touched. And by the time, like they did not develop properly. And like by the time they were two, like, I mean,
complete failure to thrive.
Awful. Yeah. Complete failure to thrive. And that is what he's talking about. And so that touch is so necessary for us as humans. And something else that kind of I was thinking about from that is I see this cycle happen a lot in marriages of it feels like from the woman's perspective, it feels like every touch leads to sex. And so we pull back on touch. And then it feels like from the man's perspective that my woman is never interested in me. And so the second there is touch, it's like, oh my gosh, she's interested in me. And so then the cycle then perpetuates and gets even worse, that every touch then truly does lead to sex. Yeah. Because like this cycle has been perpetuated so much. And so one of the things that I like to say a lot to like private coaching clients is touch your husband more. Touch him all the time. Give him just like, as you're going past him, touch him on the shoulder. Like give him a hug when he leaves. Give him a hug when he gets in. Just give him a hug every time he walks in the room. Give him a quick kiss. Like touch him more. When you're sitting on the couch, put your hand on his knee, put your hand on his arm, shoulder, whatever. Hold his hand. Like just add more non-sexual touch. And honestly, things get so much better with that simple, tiny change.
So right along those lines. It's 2007, and I'm doing a whole semester on theology of the body for high school students, right? It's my Life Team program. We're going through it. And so what I began doing was I had a class called Parent Life. Life Team stole my name. And no, it's fine. It's fine. I don't get any credit. But so
that's hilarious.
They really did too. So funny. So we had 65 adults come once a month, and I would teach them what I'm going to teach in the next month to their kids. And I thought it was a great way to kind of like overlap and do all this stuff. Turned out it was our most successful adult faith formation program, and it was led by the youth minister. So, so you can tell the older generation is starving for good catechesis. And so, especially about this stuff. So the day that I was talking, this one particular day, was on contraception. And obviously, I know the reception of the Catholic Church's teaching among Catholics is, 60% at best, ignore it, if not outright hostile, reject it. Very few know what NFP is, especially in how to use it effectively and rightly. They think it's the rhythm method. I got rhythm, I got rhyme, I got 9 kids. So, so when I was talking about it, this one woman shoots her hand up in the air, super aggressively. All my homeschool moms who are sitting in the front row, and they all have like 10 kids, they start like they have those little finger rosary rings, and they just start praying because she didn't ask a question, she told me a question. This is ridiculous, and this is stupid, and blah, 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 blah. And she just launches into me about how stupid the church is for not allowing contraception. So I let her talk, and I said, well, so we're going to talk about this. If you could hold on to the end. Like, I love your questions. I love your objections. It's great for you to ask that, especially if you've never heard this before. I said, so that's what the whole talk is about. So at the end, if you still have that. So I start going through these things, and then I start going through NFP. And my sales pitch for NFP is it teaches men in particular, but both, how to express physical intimacy without it being sexual or without it ending in sex. The woman raises her hand again, and she stands up and just starts crying. And she said, in 21 years of marriage, my husband has never once touched me without it leading to sex. Right? The purpose of it is to, is essentially foreplay. And she said, and I'm just now realizing what a poverty that is. Her words. They were wealthy. They owned like 250 businesses, these like franchises all around Texas. I mean, they were making money cash over fist. And here's the deal. she was lonely. She was so lonely. Yeah. And he not understanding this, to me, NFP is, hey, we have to practice periodic continence, but that doesn't mean you practice for this time period. You don't love your wife. You don't talk to her. You don't show her affection. You don't do any of this stuff. You just don't engage in foreplay. And then all of a sudden it's like, wow, the school of learning to love my wife and to love on my wife. I love that phrase. Just love on her, to love on my wife with,
just love on her.
I'm trying every day. But to do that, I mean, like systematically, like the thing that pisses me off so much about this stuff, my mom and dad are just they've been married for 50 plus years and they are constantly in the same trap. At least my mom is, which is, when is he going to change? And it's like, when are you going to realize he's not? So work within what you have. Like, you married an introvert, but you demand that he's an extrovert, right? Like, that doesn't work. You don't get to do that to people. He never knows what to do around the house. Okay, if he never knows, that's because he has a different mental framework for how he views the stuff. You're pathological. You see dirt where there is no dirt. He sees no dirt even where there is dirt, right? So, like, how about this? How about you just give him a list and now save yourself why isn't he like this and why isn't he like that? Well, if that's true about household chores and cleaning, how much more true is that about love, intimacy, physical touch, contact, romance? And if we don't ever communicate except in the middle of a fight, then what you get, if you only communicate in the middle of a fight, like, how come you never take me out? How come we never do this? How come we never do that? Then what ends up happening is you'll get that reaction. You'll get what you want for like 2 weeks because it's a defense mechanism. So then he's on the well, how come you never do this? How come you never do that? Or fine, dear, fine. Pick a place and we'll go. I don't want to pick a place. I want you to pick the place, right? And then endless. So fights are good. I'm a big believer in fights are good, especially early in marriage, so that you understand where you are. And the funny thing is you rarely stay that way when you grow in communion with your beloved. Like, your preferences change, how you interact changes, how you communicate changes. And also you need to have a deeper appreciation for how the family of origin, right, expresses this stuff. So my wife's family they're not touchy-feely at all. I was just having coffee with my mother-in-law when I was up at Seek, and they live in St. Louis, and so I was there every day, and I would wake up and I'd have coffee with her, and then I'd head out, get my Uber to the convention center and hang out with 30,000 of my closest friends. And she was telling me this funny story about her daughter who is a teacher and all this stuff, and she's awesome, but they were watching Sound of Freedom, and the child exploitation movie, and she was like freaking out. She's a school teacher, young kids just out of college. She was like nuzzling into her mom, and her mom's like, "Get away," like jokingly. But for my kids have my mentality when it comes to this, which is like, in our family, while we're not super lovey-dovey, there's always physical contact. There's always like, you sit next to each other on the couch, you do, whatever. It's like funny things like that. And so you're bringing these two different perspectives. It's okay to have two different perspectives, two different preferences, two different levels of tolerance for how often sex occurs or how you choose to express intimacy. I mean, we've lived for 30 years with the 5 love languages. Have we learned nothing in all of this time? Come on.
I know. I think the 5 love languages are absolutely brilliant. And you know what's a fun fact is when you read through the Song of Songs, you can find every single one of those love languages.
Oh, nice. Which really love language is about our couch being verdant? That's my favorite line in Song of Songs. Our couch is verdant.
I'm surprised that catching the little foxes isn't your favorite line in Song of Songs.
Second favorite. That's actually where it comes from. That's where the podcast title comes from. Not everyone knows.
I mean, I figured.
We had one priest say to me, I think it's about, does it come from Song of Songs or does it come from the story of Samson tying torches to the tails of foxes to throw off the Philistine army? I was like, dude, no, it is not the Samson thing. It's Catch for Us the Foxes. It was the name of an album of an indie rock band. We both love it.
I love it. Well, my company name is Vines in Full Bloom, so that also comes from Song of Songs. So
that's awesome. But going back to it, like, I think of like the primacy of physical touch, right? So here's an awesome story that's non-sexual, right? Shocking. I do prison ministry. I love prison ministry. It's changed my life. It's changed everything I do. And what we do is we do these 3-day retreats called the Colby Prison Retreat Ministry Retreats. Okay. If you're familiar with Curcio and blah, 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 and all the different derivatives, there's a derivative called ACTS. It used to be called ACTS in prison. So it's like that. And it was so amazing. So amazing. Changed my life. So anywho, one of the guys falls in love with it, becomes a chaplain's assistant. So he goes in and actually works he's like a full-time volunteer and for the chaplaincy. And he goes up into administrative segregation, also known as solitary confinement. And these are guys, the movies have lied to you. You're not locked in solitary for 3 days. These men have been in there for 30 years in a Texas prison with no air conditioning, in the summer heat, all of that stuff, 115 degrees, 120 degrees. So he goes in there, and there's a mesh, steel mesh, concrete walls. There's not bars. It's a door. It's a steel door with mesh. The day before, my buddy Brian had given a talk on Christian morality, and he was talking about the incarnation and how that affects morality, that the word became flesh, and the flesh matters, right? So he goes and he's thinking about this, and he goes up to a guy who was a hitman for MS-13, who's serving 3 life sentences. So he will die in prison. He's violent in prison, so he's now in administrative segregation, and he's been there for 24 years. So just imagine right now, if the only time you've ever heard your name spoken, it was spoken by a judge 24 years earlier when you were sentenced. They call you inmate. If you run into anyone else, they'll call you by your prison nickname. Most of the prisoners, though, because you're in ad seg, they don't know you. You're not in general population. You are let out for 50 minutes to like 120 minutes, so it's like just shy of an hour and a half, to go outside in a fenced-in cube and walk in a circle for an hour so you can get your outdoors time. And then you walk back. So 23 hours a day, basically, you're in your cell. You eat in your cell, everything. My buddy goes there to do ministry, and the guy is Catholic. He had gone to confession several weeks earlier when a priest came who could speak Spanish. And he said, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. He's like, I'm going to put my pinky through the mesh of the steel door. And if you want, you can hold my pinky while we pray the Our Father together. Because he's thinking, when has this man ever been, and this is going to sound weird just saying it out loud, but lovingly touched? He's never, I mean, at least in 24 years. So he puts his pinky through, knowing that the guy could bite it off, knowing all the personal risk. He puts his pinky in there. The guy holds it. They start praying the Our Father. The guy's praying it in Spanish, Padre Nuestro, and he starts going. And as he's praying it, he's squeezing it, and he's just sobbing hysterically. It's the first time someone has ever loved him in 2-3 decades of life. We don't want our spouses to feel like that, right? So, and we ourselves, we don't want to feel like that. We have entered into a covenant relationship with our beloved, where we stood before God and neighbor and said, I do, right? So the most important things you and I can do is understand, like if we're the higher ranked libido, is to understand why, right? To understand why. Why do I like this more? Beyond the physical pleasure, why? And one of the things that you uncover is that you personally need to grow in chastity. You need to understand that just because you have a desire, democracy kind of undergirds this, but just because you have a desire doesn't mean you automatically get to have it fulfilled. And so growing in spiritual maturity means, okay, I need to integrate this desire into the wholeness of what it means to love another person, to give my life, to lay down my life for my bride. And so the first part of that is understanding self, right? Adam alone before God. The second part of that is communicating with your woman, right? With the woman, right? With your woman. That sounded weird. Woman, let's communicate, right? So, but
maybe not that way.
Yeah. Woman, get over here. We're going to talk. We're going to have a heart to heart. Yeah, and so this is the thing, like, it's so difficult and it's so uncomfortable and it's so embarrassing to talk about this stuff. At least it is in the beginning. It is not even remotely embarrassing, uncomfortable, or difficult now with me and my wife when we talk about this stuff. And we go through stages. Like, we had 3 miscarriages. Every time we had a birth, we had a C-section. So there's all this stuff around birth and whatnot, that you have to, well, you can't have sex for 6 weeks, can't have sex for 4 weeks, you can't do this, you can't do that. So you're like, okay, if I'm a man who has irrational demands, then what's going to happen? I'm going to go look at pornography and masturbate, and then I'm going to call that, biting myself until I can have sexual intimacy. Well, guess what you just did to your wife? You just reduced her to her sexual organs, and you've subtly called to mind that her sexual value is only rated or ranked insofar as it brings me pleasure, right? Now, if you're a woman and you have a decreased desire for sex, you need to understand, and I mean this with every fiber of my being, your lack of initiation is a slap in his face, right? And women do not understand that. Oh, he always wants it. I'm just a piece of meat. No, you're not. It's one of the primary ways we are hardwired, pun intended, for sexual intercourse, right? Men are like a light switch when it comes to sexual arousal, right? It's like, we're ready to go. That took me 4.5 seconds. Let's go, right? Like, and women are not.
Let's do it. Yeah.
And women are not. And that's okay. So men need to understand that the progressive rise of arousal is a thing that happens for women, and women need to understand that the rapid rise in arousal, especially just through visual stimuli or something like that, is enough. It literally is enough so that we can have sexual intercourse. And so for women to strategically withhold sex because they're angry, to withhold sex as a way of punishing the man, you are wrong 10 times out of 10 for doing that. Now, if you don't trust, if you're afraid, if you're hurt, or if you're physically, in pain or something like that, then you're not wrong, right? Like, if you don't trust the person that you're gonna, for women, it's so different. Like, you are allowing someone inside of you, right? Right? And it's so funny to think about that, but that is a totally different experience for men. It's a totally different. I am going inside. Like, it is an external act. And for women to think, because it's different for you, because you feel differently or regard it differently, you're wrong. That's the place where almost all of this communication and stuff breaks down. The man is embarrassed to say exactly what he wants. So then it becomes the very thing she's scared of, which is sex just becomes an exchange of bodily fluids and pleasure. Like, that's it. And but we create that by not having the right conversation.
Yeah, I want to highlight that, like, women not initiating thing, because this is just it's so common. And I know I've been on my own, like, journey through the difficulty of initiation. And one of the places I see it a lot of, like, this is why I don't initiate, is I don't initiate because when I do, my husband thinks I'm immediately ready for sex. Guess
because
what?
he is.
Guess what? Because he is.
You walk in the room and you go, hey, and he's like, oh, da, let's do this. It's the Imperial March in the background.
There is a lack of communication there. And that it doesn't mean that you shouldn't initiate. It means that you have to talk about it outside of the moment.
Yes, outside of the moment.
Outside of that particular moment, you need to talk about it before and say, look, I want to initiate more with you because I know I love you so much, and I know that this is important for our marriage, whatever you want to say there, right? But, dear husband, I need you to understand that I need about 15 minutes. I need about 20 minutes. I need about 10 minutes, right? Like, I have to have a build up to be ready for sex. When I initiate, that doesn't just mean I'm just immediately ready for sex.
It's so funny when you think about it, but, like, just you saying that out loud is like, yeah, no, that's definitely one of the major things. But can I also point out, like, so this has been a conversation with me and my wife. I've said, honey, if I'm the one doing all the initiating, you're reducing me to begging. I don't want to beg for something that you should want to give me. Right? I don't want to beg. Yeah. And if you make me beg, right? That. If you make me feel like I'm begging, like, there's something that you need to work on. And I mean, I'm going to say this. This is going to get me in trouble with your audience, but women have to be held accountable for their emotional abuse of men in these regards. Because there's a lot of, like, the female perspective is the default moral perspective. And if men come at it from a different perspective, they're automatically either viewed with suspicion or they're just wrong. And so there's no, like, I find that when I'm having sex with my wife, making love to my wife, that is an expression of love for me. It is an expression. I feel closer to her. When I feel emotionally distant from my wife, I don't think, well, I'm just going to use her for sex tonight. I don't even think about having sex with her. I mean, within reason, I'm always kind of thinking about it. But the idea, right? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, the idea is like, yes, it's a part of the relationship. And if you're the never initiating, I'm talking for those who are like, no, he wants it more than I do, so therefore it's on him. Screw that, right? Because then he feels all the time like he's doing something wrong that you don't want him. Right. And so my thing is, like, part of the reciprocity, you want a man to build you up, be understanding that it takes you a while to rev the engine, as it were. Right. That arousal is more than just, hey, you want to have sex? Like, that's it for me. I'm good to go. Yes. But if you want that, you also have to understand, and like, it's honesty. Like, you have to understand that then he feels all the time like the burden is on him. So it's like, so why bother? But if he says, so why bother? And you're going 2, 3, 4 weeks without having sex, and that's one of a man's primary ways of expressing physical touch, intimacy, and love and self-gift. You're essentially cutting yourself off from a way that he shows his love for you. So if you feel unloved, well, guess what? It's your fault in that circumstance, right? Now, of course, we can throw your fault. Well, he's this, he's that. Again, obviously, your mileage may vary, but women need to take a lot more freaking accountability for the lack of sex in their marriage, because to a man, in a certain way, it is love, right? We love with our bodies, right? We go work, we do these things. Like, to me, that is how I show my wife love, my kids love, right? I work to provide a home, just like some people making a meal is like this. Or my wife, it's acts of service. When you talk about the 5 love languages, to serve someone. We just had a friend who lost a baby, and 48 hours old. Baptized, confirmed in the hospital, and passed. We just went to the funeral. My wife and the women that she's friends with, they're all acts of service as their primary way of showing love, which is awesome because someone's always getting a casserole. But like it's like, okay, what can we do for her? How can we help her? How can we provide meals? How can I, like, we were taking their kids into our house and having them spend the night and doing all this stuff because they need that. The wife said one time, my husband is, he feels like distant because we have so many kids, and he's an atheist, and he doesn't understand the whole Catholic thing about big families. And he just said to me, an offhanded comment, we're not really close anymore. Within 24 hours, all the women had agreed to take all their kids so that they could go away on a weekend trip together. Right? Like, fantastic. That's but if you told my wife that you wanted to do that for her, you wanted to serve her, she'd be like, no. She hates it. It is not the way she receives love, but it's the way she gives love. And so it's like, okay, but this is one of the ways that husbands give love and feel loved. And for people to weaponize it, it's like, you got to be held accountable for that. You can't do that. Just because you don't want it and he does, doesn't mean he's wrong and you're always right. That's all.
Yeah. Let's talk about like what love really is. Love is giving of yourself, right? And so like in the acts of service, right, your wife is giving of herself when she makes a casserole for someone. Yeah. But now let's look like biologically at sex. The man gives something, right? He gives the sperm physically into the woman. There is like we can always let the biological inform the deeper truths of things. Like, well, why is it that sex is such a primary way that men like give and receive love? Is because they're physically giving of themselves. They're like literally part of themselves is being given to another person. Like, whoa.
Yeah.
And we got to receive that. Like, that's a lot of pressure.
Very much so. Very much so. Yeah.
And women suck at receiving love. We're just really bad
Right.
at
It's
it.
like my wife with acts of service, right? She actively hates it. She was at a women's group like in the early days of our marriage, and she was upset at me. And the women that she was with, they're all in their, so we were in our 20s and they were in their 40s. And they go, wait. You're mad at your husband because 2 nights a week he cleans the home, does the dishes, and cooks dinner while you're doing these evening shifts. And you're mad at him? And they're like, girl, you need to turn this I'm God's gift to helping other people down a bit and let other people help you. And she was like, dang it. Yeah, you're right. Okay. But yeah, I mean, it's true, right?
Yeah.
The thing that
Well,
keep going.
There's so much you can just see the twisting of the evil one in women's inability to receive love, because our body is the receiver, right? Like sex is this image of God's relationship with us, and women don't want to receive. We don't want to receive love, but like we're built to receive love. And so if you have a hard time receiving love, you need to take that to prayer, and you need to go to adoration with that and just like figure out, why are you having such a hard time receiving love? Because that's part of your humanity. That's part of your femininity to receive love. And like that is, if you have a hard time receiving love outside of the bedroom, no wonder sex is a problem in your marriage.
Yeah. And I can tell you, okay, so do you want to have a good marriage? I think everyone wants to have a good marriage. Right.
Agreed.
Right. I don't think there's ever, even my friend, people in my life who are divorced or divorcing, they're like, where did it go wrong? I thought it was this and I thought it was that. And you're like, but here's where it went wrong. Number one, you're immature. Like, we don't have self-control. We live in a culture that does not tell us to have self-control. We live in a culture of expressive individualism where just because I have a desire, I have the right to have that desire fed, met, whatever. And then you take all of that, and you have men and women who are oftentimes naturally avoidant to communicate the very things that bother them or the very things that matter the most, right? There's a wonderful book called Crucial Conversations. And in the book, there are behavioral therapists who talk about how to have difficult conversations. I love this book. I read it probably 3 times a year. And
I'm like jotting it down right now.
I saw your hand go out to the side. I was like, ooh, taking notes. Yeah, Crucial Conversations. It's great. It's great. And one of the scenarios that they use, right, so it's largely about work, but one of the scenarios that they use is a husband and wife where the wife does not have sex with her husband. And it's like, how do you have a conversation? And so, like, a lot of these examples will come up repeatedly. And so if you can get past your moralisms, right? So men tend to, get all hurt because the women aren't initiating. It's like, okay, well, have you asked why? No, right?
Seriously, my number one question to people is, well, have you talked to your husband about that?
Because you'll talk to everyone else.
Have you shared that thought that you just shared with me with your? Because like, I think your husband might be pretty receptive to hearing what you say if you say it the way you said it to me, not in a nagging way, not in a argumentative way, but like if you say it openly like you did to me, I think your husband would be pretty receptive.
Yeah. Yeah, and you could actually, gossip. I like the way Dave Ramsey defines gossip. It's telling people the ugly truth about someone or something to someone who can't do anything to solve it, right? So you can tell the front desk receptionist about how stupid IT is. Well, she can't solve that problem, like that's not her job.
Yeah.
And so that's gossip. And isn't it funny that we trash the people we love the most to our friend groups, and we just don't fix the problem? It's almost like we want to complain. We want to be, and I'll say it, kind of charge language, but we want to be the victim because that gives us another moral standing. And it's like, forget all this false. See, this is false moralism. This isn't virtue. What we want is to have a thriving relationship, right? So, wives, if you want to feel like queens in your husband's eyes, you have to treat him like a king, right? And he'll reciprocate.
I love that.
He'll reciprocate the heck out of that. So here's examples of ways that women make men feel like frickin' kings, right? And this might piss some of your audience off. I don't know. I have seen this happen. So this is kind of like a more traditional wife thing. But when a man comes home from work, I saw this video where this guy was filming. He was an adult son filming his mom, waiting at the front door for her husband to walk in. And she has done that every single day, except for, whatever, being sick or something, since they've been married. That she knows he's coming home, so she goes and stands at the front door, and when he walks in, she gives him a hug and a kiss. And then they've been married for 30 years, and she's still doing that. Do you understand what that does to her? Why is it that my dog is the most excited thing in my house when I come home? Right? And then, so you walk in the door, and you just get blasted. Do this, do this, do this. Oh, well, should you? Yes, this is the part of the reciprocity. It's like, let's take a moment to catch our breath together. Of the crazy day you had at work, the crazy day I had at work, the crazy day with the kids, the crazy day with the home, the crazy day with the boss, the crazy day, whatever it is.
Everybody had a crazy day. Let's
just assume that.
Agree on that.
And what's happening for the rest of the day is a team effort, right? So I can understand. So my wife homeschools 4 kids. When I come home, I understand that she needs a break. My break is coming home. Right. So if I'm at work and I'm like, oh, my gosh, work is terrible, and it might exhaust me and I might bring the baggage on with me. But I'm leaving one area and going to a totally different area, a totally different environment. If you're remaining in that area, right, like if you homeschool and then you're making dinner and then the husband comes home and he's tired and he just plops in front of the TV and the kids are still going nuts or the kids are still being kids or whatever it is, it's still like this perpetual thing. I think this is why certain women, especially stay-at-home wives, tend to shop a lot. It's because they just want that change of venue. They want to be around people. This is why like prayer groups and Bible studies and just going out and having lunch and having community, especially if you're a stay-at-home. Like, it can be such a huge blessing because it's a venue change. So, all that being said, all of those little gifts that my wife does for me, right? The little things. And I'm going to say this, and this is going to sound so loaded, but making a sandwich is we are simple creatures. Right, I'm not saying the standard get in the kitchen, make me a sandwich. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is
make me a sandwich.
Yeah, right. But I'm saying when I'm out in the yard for 4 hours trying to tame that damn backyard, and she walks out and she's like, "Hey, I got you this delicious sparkling water that's ice cold or a beer, or whatever it is." You're like, "Gosh, she really does love me." That is what men. That's the world. Like, that's it. It's nothing complicated. It's nothing weird. That's it. And so when you take that and you exchange it or we move to the category of sex, when I remember one time my wife and I, we had one of these crucial conversations. And I just said to her, I said, "Babe, here's the deal. If you don't initiate and I'm always initiating, you know what that tells me? It tells me you don't want this at all. So I feel guilty for initiating. So if you don't want me to feel guilty for initiating, once in a blue frickin' moon, you need to go full bore. You need to go." So the one day I come out of the bathroom and I'm like sitting on the edge of the bed and I'm like gearing myself up. It's like 5:45 for the day. My wife just dog piles me behind me and pulls me over backwards. And I remember thinking, this is the greatest morning ever. Right? Like, it's not being me like waking up and being like, "Hey," right? And the funny thing is, that's more memorable for me. So as a man, she doing that was more memorable for me than all of the other encounters where it was like, even, obviously she's a willing participant, but when it's like not initiate, like for a man, like that's huge. You just treated me like a freaking king. I love that. Right? And then you'll find, and this is the book Love and Respect, which dubious, he speaks in too much general terms, but St. Paul in Ephesians 5, when he talks about husbands love your wives, wives love you, he says, "Wives, see that you respect your husbands, husbands love your wives." in that culture, wives were required basically by law to respect their husbands, right? That doesn't exist anymore. Husbands were not required in any way, shape, or form to love their wives. Husbands often had multiple wives, and if they were married, that meant the children that they had were inheritors, so you often married for status. If you had a concubine, I've heard that word my whole life, didn't know what it was till about 2 years ago. A concubine is a wife whose children do not have marriage or inheritance rights, right? Unless all your other kids are dead, right? And in the ancient world, that was a real thing, right? So St. Paul was so countercultural, telling husbands to love their wives. You know, St. Peter says, do not be harsh with them. St. Paul in Colossians says, do not make your wives bitter, right? There's so much that it demands of the man and of the woman. One of the key phrases is respect your wives. And I asked a bunch of dudes at my work, I said, how many, and this is purely anecdotal, how many of you would, if you could be loved by everyone, but no one respects you? Which is kind of a dumb thing to say, right? Like, it doesn't fully make sense to be loved. But I just try to cast it as these, like, kind of like, here, you have option A, option B. Everyone respects you, but no one loves you. Everyone loves you, but no one respects you. And I said, what would you rather have? And every man, with maybe a fourth of a second hesitation, said, oh, yeah, totally, respect over love.
Wow.
Everyone. Are you kidding me? Have you ever had someone that deeply respected you but didn't like you? They're like, shit, man, Gormley, he can give a talk. Whatever it might be. And they don't even like me. I'm like, hell yeah. Right? Like, I'm the man, right? I feel like a king, right? I don't give a rat's ass about all that other stuff. And so when you have this, in the book, he says, and women want the opposite. Like, yes, all women want to be respected. You know, Aretha Franklin's song, R-E-S-P-E-C-T, right? That was originally written by a man. And read the lyrics of that song from the perspective of a man. All I'm asking for is a little bit of respect when I get home. Right? That's the original song. Right? And so but what do we do? And this is the same thing that I said earlier. We live in a feminine society wherein we value, and obviously we are terrible to women too. This is a problem with absolutes and generalizations. It's generally the wrong. But right. So we live in a world where it values the feminine kind of perspective as more moral than the male. And so part of this is like, do you deserve unconditional love? Well, absolutely. Do I deserve unconditional respect? No, you have to earn that. It's like, but I function on respect and you function on love. Why don't I give you love and you give me respect? And then it turns out I also want your love, and it turns out you also want my respect. That's how we reciprocate, right? The giving and the receiving, not the giving and taking.
I think one of the things that happens a lot is we think about this reciprocal love and respect and, you know, all of these kind of things, and we start keeping score about it. We think of it in these terms of, I gave this, so that means I deserve this. And like, it just becomes this like transactional thing, which is even more of a problem than, I don't know, maybe anything else we've talked about. Yeah. And if you've listened to any of this conversation and your immediate thought went to like sort of transactionalizing anything that we've been talking about, like, I want you to take that to prayer and adoration, because none of what we've been talking about has like should be transactionalized. Yeah. There's a word for you.
Yeah. Because then, I mean, this is the problem of the modern age, if I can get a little too philosophical. Modernity, one of the things we do is we quantify everything. And when it comes to, and that's easy for men. That's easy for men to quantify. To understand things in relation to external numbers and, you know, whatever, tit for tat, to use a funny phrase in this context. But what we're going for is qualitative. It's not a numbers game. It's a quality game, right? It's the experience of, how can I show you the most amount of love possible? How can you and I, if we have to abstain for 8 weeks because you have a horrible medical condition and all of these things are going on, that you don't feel an ounce less loved, and nor do I, because we know how to show each other love and respect. We know how to give and to receive one another, the gift of one another. Dr. Abigail Favale, who is one of my favorite humans who has ever lived, she's now at the McGrath Institute for Church and Life at Notre Dame, and she wrote a book called The Genesis of Gender. And in that book, she's going through.
So good. That book is amazing.
Yeah. I own a physical copy, a Kindle version, and an audiobook. And I've interviewed her 2-3 times now. Yeah, I own it all. And
Super fan.
100%. Number one, she's an incredible writer. And to have to deal with such a difficult topic, she just crushes it. It's the best. It is hands down the best book that's out there. Ignatius Press better have given her $1 million for that book. So she, and I'll take a cut for all the recommendations I do. But she had this line, which was something like, I'm paraphrasing now, but it was something like, loving your bodies is a lifelong task. Right? At every stage of life, there's a new thing. She has this great description of women in the YMCA locker room of these young 20-somethings, walking around, getting their shower, and this, aged elderly woman with saggy breasts trying to maintain her, a level of health in her physical life. And she just describes in a very thoughtful, reflective manner of like all of these stages of life. It's so hard to love your body, but we are our bodies. It's so hard though. It's so difficult for women. That I think is far more intense, because for women, in a certain sense, you could say, because men are so wired for arousal visually, which is why Playboy outsells Playgirl, 25-1. Those were pre-internet statistics. But men are so wired visually and women feel that, right? They feel the look, the dehumanizing, the depersonalizing, the evaluative look that men don't necessarily feel in response. I think nowadays, basically, as long as you're 6 feet tall, you could get a date, right? You could be ugly as hell. Apparently, the only stat that matters is height for these godless women. But the fascinating thing with that is it causes your own baggage to develop, and female hesitancy, I think, is often tied to how they feel about their own bodies, and then letting someone else love and appreciate their body. It's very vulnerable. And for a man, what I tell my wife, and then the advice I give to other men, is to shower your wife with compliments, to shower your wife with love, to say I love you, to speak those words into her life so that she knows that she's beautiful to you. Because
it's so hard for women to believe those words, because we tell ourselves 50 times a day, every time we look in the mirror, oh my gosh, I've gained weight. Oh my gosh, I don't look the same as when I got married. Oh, this, baby weight, all this kind of stuff, right? We tell ourselves that 50 times a day. In order to combat what we tell ourselves on the inside 50 times a day, we need to hear it like 100 times a day from our husband. Yeah. And I'm not saying it's the husband's job to make the woman feel good about her body. That's an internal journey that we all need to be on.
It's the both and
love and accept our body. But it's the both and, right? It's that husbands, men, tell your wife how beautiful she is as many times a day as you can. And women, believe your husband, trust your husband in what he's saying, because he's not lying to you.
Yeah.
He's not trying to coerce you into having sex. We as women, I think overall have such a problem, because we think of this desire that our husbands have. Because I don't have that desire, it must be a lustful desire. It must be lustful because I don't ever feel that way. And so then we don't trust our husband when he's telling us that we're beautiful, because we're like, all he's trying to do is get me into bed. Well, yeah, that's true. He is trying to get you into bed, but out of the most loving and respectful way, he is trying to get you into bed because he wants to love you, not because he wants to use you.
And okay, so just think about it for everything that you just said, right? Women, they tell themselves 50 times a day that they're unlovely. What better way could I not just say, but demonstrate that I still find you beautiful and attractive and sexy and all the things? What better way is there than sex? Right? I'm saying, I still value you. Now, you might feel the exact opposite when you're having sex. You might feel like you're being used. But for most decent men, right, even though the pleasure is awesome, high five, for most decent men, it is a way they express their love and appreciation for their brides, for their brides' bodies. It's a visceral thing But it's a whole, because our spiritual nature, another unfortunate term, penetrates our entire physical nature, right? Like you said, like, let's go to biology. The biology is expressive because reason encompasses it, right? Our chassis, we're not monkeys, we're not gorillas, we're not apes who are just trying to spread their seed as far and wide as possible and dominate and all this stuff. It's bound in the holy sacrament of matrimony. And so it's a pledge of I am yours and you are mine. And so for a husband to express that differently, but still, I mean, like, you know, my wife will say that. Like, I'll pay her a compliment and she'll go, I don't feel that way. And I go, that's because you're wrong. Right? You're wrong. You are stunningly gorgeous, right? And then sometimes when she feels beautiful, right? You know, those times when she does the hair and the makeup and she spends extra time and she buys, we're going to this big thing called the Patronal Feast Day for our church. And her and my oldest daughter went shopping and they picked out a couple dresses and they did this thing. And then she did a little fashion show with my oldest daughter, and they go back and forth and all this stuff. And my wife said, when I came home, she had this like grin on her face and she goes, you're going to love the way I look in this dress. And I'm like, baby, I already do. Kids, go outside. Like, she's not even wearing it. It's folded on the table. And I'm just like, honey. I'm so excited because she feels beautiful, right? Don't you want to feel beautiful? If you can look at your husband's libido as a fundamental affirmation of your physical beauty and your physical, and him desiring still to want to be with you, then maybe that might be enough to reframe how you view sex.
I really like that.
Right? Look at us. We're processing out loud.
High drive as a fundamental affirmation of, oh my gosh, that's awesome.
Right?
Okay. I have a question for you.
Yes, ma'am.
What do you think is the biggest thing couples miss the mark on when it comes to sex and intimacy?
Okay, so I'll start off with the funniest one. It takes on average like 8 minutes for a woman to orgasm and 1 minute for a man to orgasm. So a man has to make up the difference. Like, I said that too. What is the stat? It's like 1 in 3 women by the time they're a senior in high school has been sexually assaulted in some manner, right? So like very few.
I think it's higher.
It's higher than that. So like, and it's like 1 in 4 boys, right? So very few of us are getting out of this culture, getting out of childhood, adulthood, young adult, life without a ton of scars and a ton of wounds. And almost all of them are bound up with sexual intimacy because sex is not just a bodily act, it's a whole person act. And so if you realize that men and women are different, see 1 minute versus 8 minutes, if you realize that men and women experience sex internally and externally, fundamentally different, and they might mean something, but also the negative side effects of being in this culture, the defense mechanisms that we build up, all of these things, it is worth going to Applebee's, drinking a bunch of beer, and having a conversation with your beloved over what were your past experiences? What were your trauma? Like, talking about this stuff in a way that doesn't feel like you're in a therapy session, but also feels like I actually am communicating with my spouse about the things that matter most because they're the most hidden, right? They're the most hidden. I had a how do I put this? There was a person that I knew, as vague as possible, who had substantial sexual trauma in her life, right? And substantial. She had a complete incapacity to love without it being hyper-sexualized. Hyper. To the point where, it was just crazy. Do you know what was... This person wrote me an email and said, I've your love for me and your restraint, we weren't married or anything like that, prepared me for my husband. Like, we don't understand. Like, if I was a little bit less self-possessed and had a little bit less self-control, and God knows I've been in confession for this crap, but I could have taken advantage of that. And I would be another person in a long line of trauma in this woman's life. When my best friend, when he got married, his wife was super apprehensive. And she just said, and he found out, like, the reason why she was apprehensive is someone who essentially at 15 lost her virginity, and it was a horrible experience. She's like, oh, yeah, like, let me give you advice on the honeymoon night. It's going to be terrible. It's going to be awful. Just let him do his thing and get off you. And it's like, whoa. This is not at all.
That hurt.
Yeah. Yeah. And well, that's actually what the girl said. It's going to hurt, and it's not going to be joyful, and you're going to hate it.
Oh, gosh.
So my best friend went out of his way to make it an expression of deep and abiding love. See, we don't know these things about each other, or we don't know the depths of and we don't even know the depths of our own heart, right? Our heart is hidden even from us. So that's why Socrates said it's a lifelong task to know thyself. But I really do think, like, really having these conversations, usually involving alcohol, maybe if you're not into alcohol, a very aggressive glass of ice water. But, this is the stuff where you unburden.
Alcohol, there's a truth to that, because did you know that it's fundamentally easier to learn a foreign language if you are tipsy? Because your walls come down and you're no longer like trying to be perfect. And so it's actually easier to learn a language if you're not trying to be perfect, and you say things wrong and then you figure out what you said wrong, and you learn it, right? But like in these deep conversations, that glass or two of wine to the point, or beer or whatever, to the point of like tipsiness is actually fundamentally helpful for bringing those walls down and bringing those defenses down so that we can have that like open conversation.
In vino veritas, in wine there is truth. Absolutely.
It's true.
Yeah. It's very true. Yeah. I've also said things I deeply regret when I was like, whoopsie.
Well, that's
this
true
is why
too.
moderation
that's
matters.
why you got to keep it at the right level.
Yeah, no kidding.
Oh my gosh. Gomer, it has been phenomenal chatting with you. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your thoughts and wisdom with us. I love it.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I'm so happy that you pressured me at the SEEK conference to do this by asking me once and me saying, yes. Yeah, this is awesome. Keep doing what you're doing. More women and more men need to it's so dumb, but we just need to talk to each other and really listen. Right? That's it. I mean, that solves so many problems. So many problems.
Thanks so much for listening. If you are not already following us on Instagram, be sure to check us out at Charting Toward Intimacy. And if you listen to podcasts on a platform that gives you the option to rate or review, we'd love for you to do that because it helps us spread the word about the podcast. If you ever have questions, comments, or episode topic ideas, please reach out to us. We love to hear from you. You can reach out on Instagram or send us an email. Our email is in the show notes. Until next time.